Hi, my name is Michelle Nicodemus. I chose to do my project presentation on the oppression of women, and most specifically the oppression against women kind of in a general overall history, and how women have been oppressed through limited availability of higher education and career choices. So the feminist movement was kind of in full swing in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Such prominent women, as we know, Susan B. Anthony was a huge part of the feminist movement. Later on, there was kind of a second wave of a feminist movement that took place in the 1970s. During that time, we saw that the ERA had come through and was pushing for equal rights for women, and that they wanted their voices to be heard. A lot of this was really had a lot to do with men sexualizing women and sexual harassment, and that women wanted to be in the workplace and be respected. It's actually interesting. There was a woman, Phyllis Schlafly. She made a huge stink. She did not have the belief that women should be asking for those equal rights, that they should be quite happy staying at home and taking care of their families and taking care of their husbands. Another thing that happened in the 70s that was really pretty great was there was in the college in San Diego and later at Cornell, we saw an actual women's studies department open up. This kind of reviewed how women were a pivotal part of history over several hundred years, and how they've been victimized and oppressed by men, and what they've done to rise themselves out of this oppression. So in discussing the 70s, I was born in 1973. So I was in grade school by the mid-70s. One memory that I do have is my teacher asking me in the class, what we wanted to be when we grew up. And it's such kind of like this wide open, oh my God, I can be anything. And we were told that you can be anything when you grow up. You want to be president? Sure, you can be president. If you want to run a company, sure, you can do that. But realistically, those options weren't really there. One thing that the school system did do is that they discouraged children, young ladies specifically, from really following through on any careers that would be considered for young men or men later in life. When we read Free to Learn, there was a section in there talking about the hierarchy in the school system, and that kind of how the principal was the male dominant, and it trickled down to the females, and then from the female teacher down to the students. So I really have this vision in my head when I think of these two things. When I think of somebody asking me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and if I said a fireman or a police officer, and the teacher discouraging and saying, no, well, what about a teacher, or what about a nurse, or what's really popular is airline stewardess. So there was kind of all of these pushes, based specifically on your gender as far as what career you should be looking at later in life. Young men were encouraged and expected to attend shop classes, learn how to work with their hands and tools, where on the other hand, women were expected to go to home ec and learn how to cook, how to measure, how to sew, the housely duties. I remember having to carry an egg around because, someday I was going to have a baby, and that was what my role was in society. So even though, things were starting to change, they really were moving kind of slow because, everybody was kind of comfortable with the way things were. So one part on the higher education that I think is really interesting is this great woman came to the U.S., Elizabeth Blackwell. She came in 1847. She was kind of a pioneer. She was educated in Britain, in the UK, and she came to the United States. She wanted to go to medical school. So she applied, and the men, the scholars, and some of the students had actually voted on that. Should we let this, Elizabeth Blackwell attend medical school? So jokingly, she was approved. They said, yeah, sure, let her in. Let's see what she can really do. Well, needless to say, she was the first woman to ever actually get a medical degree in the United States. Interestingly enough, is her sister was the third woman to achieve her medical degree. So much for the joke, because they were both very successful in making names for herself. But Elizabeth Blackwell, most specifically, because she was the first woman to actually get a medical degree. So it's not that it was completely oppressed, but it was considered more that it was a joke that she could never do what the men there did. Another woman I'd like to bring to light that I think is really amazing is Jane Bolin. Jane Bolin is an African-American woman who attended Yale. She was accepted into Yale 295 years after the college actually opened in the United States. It was the very first college to actually open after the colonies were established. Later on, Miss Bolin actually became the first African-American woman that was part of the Bar Association, and then she was the first African-American woman to be as a judge in the U.S. So here we are in 1931, and I'm sure by the time she actually got on the judge's bench, she probably had a good 20-year tenure in her career. But again, the women that you find here on this page are very few and far between. They were not the norm of society. So as the 1970s progressed, you started to see women really kind of pushing and saying that they wanted the higher education, that they were going to go, that they refused to stay home, that they wanted to rise above what the expectations were, and that they counted. So they did this by applying to school. Now, at this point, men didn't really have the right to say no. Women were coming, and they were going to enroll, and they wanted the higher educations. Where they ended up later on and career-wise, well, that's to be discussed later. So if you look on the scale to the right for the total fall enrollment, you see between the years of 1970 and 2008, you see the significant increase. I mean, you are talking, for almost 3,000-4,000 more students coming in 2008 than there were women more than men. And that's significant. One of the other things that you can look at is at the other bar graph, we look at 1980 to 84. So now we've got people who had gone to school in the 70s and gotten at least a 4-year college degree. That's what we're looking at. But if you look down, you can actually see the differences of where men and women stood. Sadly enough, if you look at the Black, non-Hispanic women and Hispanic and Latino women, you'll find they're very sadly behind in this scale. White, non-Hispanic women had had bachelor's degree than men, and men across the board, regardless of race or ethnicity. So we started really seeing this push of women gaining education. Now, with this power of education, that also follows their careers and, what they're going to be when they grow up. So the 1990s, I think, is pretty significant, as much as the 80s, but I think we really started to see mainstream America kind of open up their eyes to what was going on and the importance of women in society and in their careers. We still may not have been making as much money as their male counterparts, which, if you look at Phylicia Rashad, I'm sure she wasn't making anything nearly as close as Bill Cosby did. But that's another conversation. Or even we look at Xena or the great cartoon. I love this. You look at what little girls were watching in the early 90s, and they're watching Rugrats, and what you see here is Mrs. Pickles. She is like the high exec. Getting in those positions, you had to be hardcore. You were all about work, and in order to prove yourself, you had to prove that you were a mother. You had to prove that you were a wife. You had to prove that you were able to balance an organization. So we really started seeing this giant shift, because women could do it all. We had the power, and we were going to prove it no matter what, no matter how much it wore us out, no matter how much it broke us down. So we, as we begin to see, women coming out of what those typical career choices were, and really based on, like I said, as we look back, education. Why those education opportunities became available, so did the opportunities for career and advancement. So I think it's something interesting to say how we're affected by mainstream America and what we're watching every day. And there's a big jump from the Cosby Show to something like All in the Family. We've come far, and we have a long way to go. So once we start hitting the 2000s, we really started to see another issue come to light. So we've been working, and women have been, pretty much busting their butts to get the recognition and the education and to work very hard to be everything that they know that they can be, or what they want, or what their dreams are. So now comes the pay gap. So here's just kind of a quick glance at some of the earnings. And it is compared to men at 100%. And if you look down, we look at, say, something like even postal clerks. Okay, well, here's a federal job where women are only making 94 cents to the man's every dollar. Pharmacists, 83.2 cents to the man's dollar. You can go right down. Lawyers, 77 cents. To tell me I went to, Harvard to get a law degree and I only make 77 cents to the man's every dollar. So there's definitely some issues that even in 2010 we had to deal with. So here's just kind of a brief glance at some of the information regarding the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and kind of their watchdog. So I want to talk about 2016 and when Hillary Clinton was nominated to be the next United States president. Now, as we know, she didn't win, and that's okay. She wasn't the right person for the job, and that's okay. But the fact is that she was acknowledged. She was put in the forefront as a choice, in that she was educated, she had the history, she had the career, she had everything that any one of her male counterparts also had. And she was the given choice for the Democratic Party. Another huge part is with this equal pay is that we are now really, really looking at what the woman is bringing home every day, their paycheck, and how important it is. One thing I think is important on the previous slide, it shows you that the equal employment, if you look up on top, it says they could be found in violation for each paycheck where equal pay was found to be in violation of these specific laws. So when we look down over here at Mom's Equal Pay, May 23rd, 2017, so they're only paid 71 cents for every dollar the fathers are paid. So that means for every single paycheck that the women are found to be of an equal asset, equal education, equal everything. There's no difference other than their genitalia, that a company can be found in violation of this. So I'd like to just say that, as far as women go and where we've come, where we've been, I think Paulo Freire, in the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, there's two interesting parts to something that was stated in the book. And it was that there are two distinct stages. The oppressed unveil the world of oppression, and they do that through the praxis, and then they see it, and they actually commit to the transformation. So I think we're in the transformation. And the second stage is the reality that the oppression has been transformed and it ceases to belong to the oppressed and becomes a pedagogy of all people in the process of liberation. So I think as women in academia and career and equal pay, we are in the process of becoming liberated.